This is The Road Show, and I'm your host, David Warren. Let me start today's program by reading you the back cover of an interesting new book. It says, "Most of us own too much stuff. We feel the burden of our clutter. We tire of cleaning and managing and organizing. The toy room is messy, drawers won't close, closets are overfilled, and we can't fit our cars in the garage. Evidence of clutter is all around us. Even worse, this constant accumulation of stuff slowly begins robbing us of life. It redirects our greatest passions. It steals our greatest potential. It consumes our limited resources, and it distracts us from the very life we wish we were living." Well, the name of this book is The More of Less, and its author is our guest for the hour. Let's welcome Joshua Becker. Good to have you with us, Joshua.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's talk about your minimalism journey as we begin today's conversation. It all started back in 2008 on Memorial Day. Tell us about that day.
I was living up in Vermont at the time. We were going to have this Memorial Day weekend. We were going to have this beautiful 3-day weekend. My wife and I woke up on Saturday with the intention of doing what most Americans do on Saturdays, clean the house and run some errands and do some shopping. It had been this long winter in Vermont, and so I had offered to clean out the garage. My son Salem was 5 years old at the time, and for some reason I had this picturesque dream of him helping me clean out the garage all Saturday morning. And so we went out to the garage, and of course he lasted about, 30 seconds of wanting to clean, and he ran off to the backyard to do some playing, asking me to come play with him, and I had to push him off. I'm here to clean the garage. This is what we're supposed to do today. So I start working on the garage. I don't know if you've had any projects like this, but one thing leads to another, and hours later I'm still working on the same garage. He's alone in the backyard the entire time. I happened to strike up a short conversation with my neighbor who was outside doing all of her yard work, complaining a little bit about how much time and effort we had to put into taking care of our houses. And she made this life-changing sentence to me. She said, that's why my daughter is a minimalist. She keeps telling me I don't need to own all this stuff. And I stood speechless for a moment, as if this was the first time in the world someone had told me I didn't have to own everything. But I remember looking back at my driveway, which I'd pulled everything out of the garage, and just this pile of dirty, dusty things I'd spent all morning taking care of. And out of the corner of my eye, then I see my son, Salem, swinging alone on the swing set in the backyard. And suddenly had this realization that everything I owned wasn't making me happy, which most of us would attest to. But this further realization that not only was everything I owned not making me happy, everything I owned piled up in my driveway was actually taking me away and distracting me from the very thing that is most important in my life. And so that began our journey of getting rid of the things that we don't need, so that we can instead start focusing our energy and passions on the things that actually matter.
And your whole career at this point, these many years later, is about encouraging the rest of us to embrace the joys of minimalism.
Yeah, it was an interesting journey. It was certainly something that I didn't ever imagine that I would do, but as we decided to go through the house and get rid of our things, we cleared out about 60-70% of our stuff. I started blogging about it, one, just to kind of act as a personal journal and diary for myself. But we started writing about it, and more people were drawn to our story and drawn to what we were writing. I was a pastor at the time, which I loved doing. But the website, Becoming Minimalist, eventually grew to, we have over 1 million people each month that come to the website. And I think it's a message that people are drawn to. As I mentioned on that back cover of the book, most of us, I think, know that we own too much stuff. And so when someone comes along and kind of paints this picture of a life with less, most people seem to be drawn to it.
Well, as we talk about minimizing today and you give us the how-tos, I want to mention two misconceptions that you point out in your book, The More of Less, of what minimizing is not. It's not about giving up everything you own, and it's also not just organizing your stuff and getting it in nice piles. What is the purpose of minimizing?
As we began owning less, we suddenly found really all these amazing life-changing benefits. As we started to own less, we found that we had more time because we were doing less cleaning and organizing. We found that we had more focus. We had fewer distractions. We found that we had more money. Found that we had more contentment and gratitude and generosity. We just started finding all these benefits. Probably the greatest benefit that we discovered, however, as we began to own less and spent less of our life taking care of things, we found that we had more opportunity to pursue our passions. Whatever they were, whatever we were most passionate about, because we owned less, we were freed up to pursue them with more of our life. And so minimalism, I think at its core is, I define it as this: minimalism is the intentional promotion of the things we most value by removing anything that distracts us from it. This, then, is always going to look different from person to person because we all have different passions, we all have different pursuits, we're all called to live a different life than each other, whatever God has called us to do and whatever the purpose is that God has given us. And so minimalism isn't about The goal of minimalism isn't just owning the fewest amount of things as possible. Minimalism is about owning just the right amount of things so that I can focus my life best on whatever it is that I most want to accomplish with my life.
Right, so you can get out the door and start changing the world because now you have some extra time and some extra resources to do so.
Exactly. And I'm pretty convinced that if you sit across a table from somebody and you ask them, what do you most want to accomplish in life? Like, very few people say, my goal in life is just to own as much stuff as I possibly can. Like, that's not how we're wired, right? We talk about love and we talk about significance and making an impact and being the best version of ourselves. But for some reason, it seems the world just feeds us all these, advertising messages, and society has this certain, heartbeat, and without even knowing it, we kind of buy into this idea that we're supposed to buy more and bigger, and we just kind of fall prey to that. Meanwhile, our heart, of course, is calling for something far greater and something far more important, which, to me, minimalism opens up our life to pursue more of.
Okay, so you point out in the book, The More of Less. By the way, our guest today is Joshua Becker, joining us by phone. And in the book, you say we need to start with ourselves. Don't start as a family or have a plan to get somebody else involved right off the bat in your quest for minimizing. We start with ourselves. Tell us why that's important.
Sure. So probably the two most common questions I get asked are, number one, what do I do when my spouse doesn't want to minimize? I want to get rid of stuff, but my spouse doesn't. Or what do I do with all my kids' stuff? Those are like the two most common questions that people ask me. And of course, that's not the right question to be asking. I mean, it is at a point and it is at a time, certainly, but it's always easier to see everyone else's clutter than it is to see our own, is what I try to remind people all the time. And I also try to tell people that it is entirely unreasonable and unfair to expect your kids to get rid of their things, their toys and their clothes, until you have gotten rid of all of your things. It's unfair to expect your partner or spouse to go through their things until you've done the hard work of going through your own as well. So always I encourage people that you got to start with your own things before you put any expectations on your spouse or your children. And it's hard. It's hard to do that. But I think that as you do that, number one, you set an example for them. Number two, I think you learn some of the emotions that arise while you're minimizing and some of the questions that you start asking. Also, I think you learn some tips and tricks and some things that work as you're minimizing and getting rid of things, which will then help your kids go through it, help your spouse go through it as well.
Okay, so let's go back to 2008. It's Memorial Day. You're cleaning the garage on Memorial Day, and your son's over there on the swing set wishing Daddy were there with him so they could do it together. And so you had this eureka moment when you spoke with your neighbor who told you about her daughter being a minimalist. So that sparked something in you, and as we mentioned, you're now a leading spokesperson with a new book called The More of Less, where you talk all about it, and of course online with your blog and your very popular website, becomingminimalist.com. Well, you started with yourself, Joshua. So where did you start? What was the first thing you started to minimize in your life?
I started in what ended up being one of the easiest places for me to start. I started in my car. Actually, the first thing I did after my conversation with my neighbor was I ran inside to find my wife and share this moment with her. And I think she was cleaning one of the bathrooms at the time. And I'm like, you'll never guess what June is our neighbor's name. You'll never guess what June said. She said we don't have to own all this stuff. And she was drawn to the idea, I think, after spending all morning cleaning the inside as well. But at the end of the day, my car, I'd pulled out of the garage and I'd parked it on the street. And so I get in my car, a little Toyota Corolla, to drive it back into the garage at the end of the day. And I think I was maybe for the first time beginning to notice how many physical things were around me. And so I'm sitting in the car and I see there's CDs that no one listens to, and there's maps that we use, and there's toys in the back seat, and ketchup packets, and books, and coins, and receipts, and pens, and like all these things that didn't need to be in my car at all. Mm-hmm. And so literally I took a bag and I just pulled everything out of the car that didn't need to be in it. I think I left the owner's manual and license and registration, insurance, mm-hmm. like just the bare minimums I kept in the vehicle, and I put everything else off to the side. The next morning I get in my car to drive to work, and it felt so nice in my car. Like everything was clean and it was calm, and I felt like I could focus on my day rather than all the things around me. And I said, this feels great. Where else can I create this feeling of calm and peace? And so we did the living room next, which ended up being because it wasn't going to be a difficult room for us. There were piles of magazines and DVDs and some knick-knack things and some toys that didn't need to be in there. And so literally the process that we use, and the one that I help other people as they go through their homes, is I always say start with the easiest, most lived-in spaces of your home. So start in the car, because it tends to be a place that you can finish quickly, or at least finish completely, and then try the living room and maybe the bedroom. And some of the, we think about, what am I ever going to do about my books or my sentimental things, or what am I going to do about my arts and crafts room or the garage? That's going to take me months to go through, right? I always say you don't start there. Start with the easiest stuff first and kind of build up this muscle, and start to notice how minimalism is changing the spaces around you, and use that motivation to go to the next harder room and then the next harder space, and on down the line.
Well, Joshua, your quest for minimizing your life did catch on with your wife, Kim, and she started to minimize in your basement. And she utilized what you call the only the best strategy. And I'm going to read a little bit from your book, The More of Less. And you write, one of the most emotional moments for Kim during our basement sorting process occurred when we came across the box of mementos Kim had collected from her grandmother Irene's apartment after this beloved relative had passed away. In many ways, Irene was a hero to Kim. My wife respected her grandmother's zest for life, her love for family, her passion for prayer, and her commitment to God. So the mementos in this box were dear to Kim. Still, we applied the only the best criterion here as elsewhere. So Kim selected 3 items from the box that, to her, were the most representative of her grandmother's life. She selected a candy dish, which now offers a sweet snack to anyone who enters our living room, just as her grandma used to. She chose a butterfly brooch to pin on her jacket, just as Grandma used to wear it when she would visit. And Kim kept her grandmother's Bible, now residing on our nightstand, just where, you guessed it, her grandmother used to keep it. In keeping fewer of Grandma Irene's things, we had brought greater value to her memory. More importantly, we have exalted the values that Irene possessed and that we desire to reflect. Because we sorted out the most important from the less important, her legacy lives on even stronger than before. I love that, Joshua. And one of the great tips you give when you're incorporating the only the best strategy, and in this case, Kim decided to keep just 3 of the items that were her grandmother's, you suggest that we get our cell phones, which many of them now have a camera on them, and take a picture of the things that we're giving away, that we didn't keep. What a great idea.
Yeah, the truth is that the memories of the past relationships or the past accomplishments or the past experiences, which tend to be the 3 things I think that we hold on to sentimental items for, whether it was a relationship or an experience or an accomplishment. The memories of those events aren't in the physical object, right? The memories are in our minds. The physical objects tend to help us recall those memories. But a picture can have, just the same effect that the physical object can, without having to store it or to carry it from place to place while we move or get on with our living. And, that example of my wife's story was, particularly relevant to some of the sentimental things that we keep and the collections that we have. And we found, as I mentioned in the story, that like holding on to more of those things isn't necessarily better. That we held on to so many of those things, they were just in boxes in the basement, and it wasn't until we went through and selected just the best, the most representative, the parts of her life that meant the most to us and to Kim, and put those in a place of greater prominence in our life, so that she could be even more a part of it today than she was before.
And one of the things you pointed out, you learned this by trial and error. You all had a garage sale when you were minimizing, and that was really a bust. You didn't get a lot of takers, and those that did buy, you were putting prices that were so cheap on there that it almost was offensive to the memory of that object and the person who had given you that object, or was that person's at some point in their life. And so what you recommend is, instead of trying to sell things that you're getting rid of, give them away to people who will be blessed by them.
It's actually really important. Generosity is such a huge part of this process. Generosity is, in many ways, the byproduct of minimalism. So as I'm removing things, we took van loads of things that we could take to Goodwill or Salvation Army or some local charities. Mm-hmm. We had van loads of things that could be used. We had a lot of baby stuff because we'd just gone through that stage of our life, and so we found the Crisis Pregnancy Center there in Burlington, Vermont, and donated those things there to be used by single moms or families in poverty. And so in many ways, generosity was the byproduct of this process, but I've come to realize that generosity is not only the byproduct of minimalism, it is also in many ways the lifeblood of minimalism. The generosity can become a very motivating factor in itself. If you have time for a quick story,
I'll tell you what, let's take a break, and that is a good teaser to have our listeners join us on the other side. I'm David Warren, talking with Joshua Becker with a great story standing by after this. I'm David Warren here with some exciting news for Oasis listeners. We have a new mobile device app. It's free, easy to download, and lets you enjoy our refreshing music and talk everywhere you go. If you have an Android cell phone, go to the Google Play Store. And if you have an iPhone or iPad, visit the Apple Store and search for Oasis Radio Network. Be an Oasis ambassador and share this news with family and friends around the world. David Warren here, back with Joshua Becker, author of the new book, The More of Less. And this book is out on Waterbrook Press, wherever books are sold across our country, also online retailers. And to learn more about today's guest, Joshua Becker, you can visit his blog and website, becomingminimalist.com. Okay, so you've got a good story for us, Joshua. What's it about? Obviously minimizing and minimalism, so tell us more.
I was talking with a lady. She had been going through the minimizing process in her home, and she told me one time, she said, look, I've done a great job. I've gone through a lot of the places of my home. One of the spots that I knew was going to be difficult for me was my closet, because I've always loved clothes and I've always loved fashion, and I just kind of dreaded having to go through my closet getting rid of some of the clothes that I had, even though I know I don't need all that I have in there. She said I was kind of dreading that moment, but just recently, as she was telling me the story, she had been driving downtown, and she passed, maybe even noticing for the very first time, her city's local battered women's shelter. And as she drove by, she thought to herself of the women that were living inside the building, many whom had left in the middle of the night with maybe just the clothes on their back and maybe their children in their arms. And she thought of their living situation, and she thought of all the clothes then that she had back piled up in her closet, just sitting there doing nothing. And she just thought to herself of all the beauty that I could give to these women by donating my unused clothes to this space. And she said, it totally changed everything for me. I went home and I filled bags and boxes full of clothes, knowing where they were going to go, who they were going to be used for, what joy they were going to bring to those women. And I find that generosity becomes this very motivating factor in minimalism, not only the byproduct of it, but the very motivation for doing it. And so we were even talking about, as we minimize, should we donate this stuff? Should we sell this stuff? And I say just find a local charity that you believe in and donate what you can there, because generosity has benefits onto our life that even more money can't possibly bring.
Okay, Joshua, we're sold now, the Oasis audience, so we want to start minimizing along with you. And so let's get specific on how to do this. Okay, so let's say I go to my closet, it's full of stuff, and I like most of it. So I'm there with a question. How do I tell the difference between what I need and what I want? How would you answer that?
Well, I would say, number one, I like to think of this process in terms of layers. So I always think that most people in their homes have a layer of things that they don't even want in their house. They just haven't taken the time to get rid of them. Most people can fill several boxes and bags just by moving room by room, grabbing things that they don't want anymore. So let's take the closet in particular. So I would say, go to your closet. I would say find those things that you know you don't want, you don't wear, they don't fit anymore, you don't like them, you just haven't taken the time to get rid of them. So I would get rid of those. The second one, then, I think that there's a part where we just need to be honest with ourselves. So in reality, we wear 20% of our clothes 80% of the time. And so we may have a closet full of things that we kind of like, and there's a few things that we sort of think that we're going to wear, or we kind of think that we do wear, but we don't actually wear, right? But in reality, we have, there's a set number of outfits. These are the clothes I like. These are the ones I find myself going back to over and over and over again. And as we remove some of those other things, as we get honest with ourselves and say, okay, I can go without this, I could do without this, I know a family, I know a place where these could be used by people, and these could be a blessing to others. As we begin making those changes in our closet, suddenly we wake up in the morning and we look at our closet in a new way. It's not stuffed full anymore. We don't have to go through 3 or 4 different shirts trying to decide which one to wear. Suddenly we have this closet that is full of just the things that we love and the things that we actually do want to wear. And it's really quite an amazing feeling when you look in your closet and everything hanging in there is something that you would like to wear on any given day. So there's benefits to that, and I think as we kind of make those steps and make those decisions, we start to see how owning fewer clothes is actually a more efficient, more effective, actually more enjoyable way to live because we don't have all the clutter, cluttering up our decisions and cluttering up our time, cluttering up our spaces.
In the book, you talk about this 29-day experiment, and you say if you can live happily without it, whatever it is, for 29 days, you're very likely going to be able to live happily without it forever. And so you have experiments for clothes, for example, since we've been talking about that. The experiment would be, I will remove 29 items of clothing from my closet and will dress without them for 29 days. Another experiment, decorations. We have those knickknacks all over the house. I will remove 29 decorating items, or an estimated 29% of decorating items, for 29 days. Let's get to the area of toys and those kids. I will remove an estimated 29% of my children's toys, and for 29 days, I will keep track of which of the removed toys, if any, the kids ask for. You go on with kitchen utensils and furniture. So, 29 days.
Yeah, it's perfect. I mean, this is even a great time to talk about this. As you think about your closet, you get rid of the things you don't want, you get rid of the things that you think you can go without, and then I think there comes this stage, this very important stage where we begin to challenge our assumptions about how much we need. The reality is that the lives that we live are entirely unique in all of human history. I mean, in all of human history, people have never owned as much stuff as we own right now. And what is normal for us today would have been seen as excessive probably even 4 or 5 decades ago, would be seen, our grandparents would certainly see, what is normal today would have been excessive to them when they were growing up. And the reality is we simply don't need nearly as much stuff as we have today. And I think the way that we discover that is we experiment and we challenge some of our assumptions. And so we get rid of a fourth of our clothing and just try it out for a month. See how you like your closet. See how getting ready in the morning changes when you remove 25% of those things. Try the decorations. Try getting rid of, a quarter of your decorations that don't mean anything to you. They just happen to be on sale at Michael's, or they match the color of the couch, and so we purchase them. But when you take those away, the decorations that you have remaining are the ones that tell your story, the photos of your family and the photos of the things that are most important to you. And suddenly you're able to focus on the things that really tell your story as opposed to the other things that were distracting you from it. And this experiment can be tried all over the place. You can try it with televisions. We did it with televisions. When we started, we had 4 TVs, which is about typical. The average American home has more televisions in it than people. And we had 4 TVs, and we said, let's just try 1 television for a month. And so we put the others down in the basement, and we just used the one. And I found out that we loved it, that when we did watch television, we did it as a family, that people weren't running into all their different rooms to watch whatever they wanted, that we were a little more intentional about what we decided to watch. And I just said, who would have thought that owning one TV was actually better for us than owning four?
Joshua, before we go to another break, there are common items that people have difficulties with as they minimize. They seem to get stuck in certain areas, and the number one area is minimizing books. So what's your advice?
Yeah, books is certainly a tough one for a lot of people. It depends. There's a number of different ways to think about books. If we're talking about nonfiction, research-based books that we're holding on to for work or an area that we studied, I find that a lot of those things can be found online now, and if you can find it online, then you don't need to keep the physical book. When we get into fiction and stories, and people are emotionally drawn to, a character or the events in one book, and there's certain memories attached to that. I should say in all of these things, I always remind people that less is different than none, and so I wouldn't tell anyone to get rid of all of their books. I wouldn't tell anyone to get rid of all of their sentimental things or all of their, yarn stash. But I would say that we probably most of us would benefit from going through there and deciding, okay, which of these books are really the most important to me? Which of these stories that I loved should I be passing on to someone else, whether through a library or a church library or just giving it up to friends so they can enjoy the same experience that I had with it? But those are some of my thoughts on books. When I did it, I had 3 bookcases, and I minimized down to one bookcase just by getting rid of some of the books that I didn't read, and I ended up knowing I wasn't going to, moving along some of the books that I had read that I know someone else would benefit from, getting rid of some of the books that I knew I could find the information elsewhere if I needed it, and ended up going from 3 down to 1, and found that in so doing I freed up a lot of physical space in my room, and suddenly my office didn't feel nearly as cramped, but it felt much more spacious because of it.
Well, one book that today's guest does not want you to give away is his book. It's called The More of Less, and it's subtitled Finding the Life You Want Under Everything You Own. His name is Joshua Becker. He is also the creator of the blog and website BecomingMinimalist.com. This book, The More of Less, is available on Waterbrook Press wherever books are sold, at bookstores, also online sellers. And when we come back, I want to ask about a couple interesting case studies. Now, this is minimalism gone wild, folks. There's a gal named Margot who got rid of 1,000 items from her home, so I want to know what her life is like now. And also a guy named Ryan. He packed every single thing he owned, in boxes, and then only took out what he needed. We'll find out what's going on in his life right after this.
The Road Show is a listener favorite, which airs each weekday here on the Oasis Radio Network, starting at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Central. The Road Show also has a great section on our website, oasisnetwork.org. There you'll find audio archives of select past interviews, plus guest lineup, and contact information and links to our Roadshow sponsors and its hosts. So join us for the Roadshow, whether on your radio or on your computer at oasisnetwork.org.
Here's a little bit about today's guest, Joshua Becker. He is the founder and editor of Becoming Minimalist, a website that inspires millions around the world to own fewer possessions and find greater fulfillment in life. As one of the leading voices in the modern simplicity movement, Joshua speaks both nationwide and internationally. And he's our guest today on The Road Show. I'm David Warren, your host. So, our goal is minimizing and creating the time and the resources to do what God has called us to do, and that's really changed the world, and we'll hopefully talk about that before we say goodbye. But some interesting case studies you point out where people really took this minimalism thing seriously. The first I want to discuss is Margot. She got rid of 1,000 items from her home. I have no clue about how many items are in my apartment right now. Is there an average, or I mean, are there 1,000 items in my apartment? I'm wondering that as I ask this question.
The LA Times, several years ago, once published a statistic that the average U.S. home owns 300,000 items. I'm guessing that they didn't go into much detail about how they got there, but I'm assuming that counts just about everything individually. But regardless, I think, yes, most people could probably find 1,000 different things in their spaces.
So what about Margot? What inspires you about her and her story?
Margot has a great story, and she kind of, I think, hits at one of the broader benefits of minimalism. We were just interacting over email, and she was talking a little bit about how this idea of minimalism had impacted her life, and she was going through her home and getting rid of 1,000 things. And she actually emailed me from a shopping mall, I assume from her phone, several months later. She said, I'm at the mall. I'm waiting for my mom to come and meet me for a meal. And she's a little bit late, and I was walking through the mall, and she said it was an amazing feeling to walk through the mall and not want to buy anything. Literally, there was nothing in any of the windows, in any of the stores, anything on sale. I was not drawn to purchase anything. And she said it was one of the most freeing feelings in the world to walk through this space and to be completely content with the things that I already had. I just love the idea that it is a bit of a different journey, I think. It's a different mindset, the idea of not just owning less, but the idea of actually wanting to own less. How as we've removed possessions and gotten to the right amount, the optimal amount of things, that suddenly our desire for consumerism begins to change, and we no longer need what everyone else is buying or what advertisers or marketers would be trying to sell us on any particular season.
That was one of my favorite quotes from your book, Joshua, when you said, "Owning less is great, but I've discovered that there's something even better, and that is wanting less."
Because when we get to that point, suddenly our life is freed up to go do whatever it is else that we want. If we're not always thinking about what we want to buy and what we want to purchase, when we stop focusing on all the things that we don't have, we can start enjoying the things that we do have. And suddenly my time and my money and my energy, my entire life is finally opened up to be given over to something else, to God, to whatever the thing that He has called me to do, to serve others.
Right, because after you buy it and you use resources that you could have used on something else, then you get to clean it and you get to maintain it, and all of that eats up time.
Absolutely, or just all the time we spend working just to buy the thing that we bring home and clean and organize and manage and maintain. Absolutely.
I'm interested to know, how many pairs of shoes do you own, Joshua?
Oh, how many pairs of shoes do I own? I have a pair of running shoes. I have a pair of casual shoes. I have a pair of sandals. And then I play basketball, so I have a pair of basketball shoes that I use just for that. And there's a pair out in the garage that I use when I'm out doing yard work. So 5 pairs of shoes that I wear.
You got me beat. I've got some work to do. Okay, Ryan, another case study that you point out in the book, The More of Less. And this guy packed every single thing, and I want to stress that, every single thing he owned in boxes, and then would only take out what he needed. Tell us how that experiment worked.
Sure. So single guy living in a condo. He decided that he was in for minimalism and really wanted to, again, I think just challenge his assumption on how much stuff he needed to own. And So he literally, him and his friend Joshua, what they call the packing party, they came over and packed everything into boxes as if he was going to move. He even covered the furniture. And then rather than just unloading everything and putting it back into his spaces, he said, I'm just going to pull out the things that I need on any given day. And I forget the exact specifics and the exact percentages, but I know that 2 weeks into it, even a month into it, he was shocked at how few things he actually used over the course of a month, and how many things were still left in boxes. I'll say this: the interesting thing, I think, Ryan and Joshua, his friend, they both write about minimalism now, and they talk about it a lot. Margot, the story we just had before, I know that she is very much talks to her friends about minimalism as well. It's something that when people experience it and when they embrace it and when they hear the idea, it's really interesting how many people want to share this with others and want to talk about what they're learning and how their life is being freed up. It's very much, I think, attractive to people in this society and the culture that we live in. So those are two good examples of people who both embrace the idea of owning less and couldn't wait to talk to other people about it after they had made the change in their own lives.
Joshua, you are married to Kim, and then you all have 2 children, correct?
Yes. My son was 5 when we started, and my daughter was 2. They're now 14 and 11.
All right, so you have what's called a minimalist family. And when Kim and you decided to do this journey together of minimizing, you wanted to reduce by 80%, and she wanted to reduce by 60%. So I have zero clue how that turned out. I guess, did you settle on 70%, or how did that turn out?
I can look back and make those statements. Certainly when we started out, we didn't have these percentages, but I soon discovered as we would go through a space and minimize, everything in, let's say, the living room or the kitchen, and we'd get to a kind of leveling point, and then I'd say, all right, let's go through the kitchen again, and let's see what else we can find that we can get rid of. At some point, Kim started, I think we're at a pretty good point now, don't you think? Do you really think we need to get rid of even more? And so, when we kind of reach that 60% mark, and I'm like, let's keep going. She's like, I think we're at a pretty good spot right now, don't you? So that's kind of what I mean by the, 60-80% difference. And so, when we life is always about, I should say this, relationships are always about compromise, and not just compromise, but about learning from each other and trying to see what they're trying to say about, what life looks like and how we might improve the family going forward. And I was free to keep doing my own things. I mean, I could get rid of more clothes out of my closet. I could get rid of more of the tools in my garage. I could get rid of more of the sporting goods that I had collected over the years. So at that point, I just began focusing on some of my own things, and that's kind of how we worked out that compromising and the differences that we had between each other.
Well, you did make a mistake along the way. You got out of your area of minimizing and went into her area of minimizing when she wasn't around, and you threw out some Jell-O molds that you wish you hadn't.
Yes. Thanks for bringing up that story.
Sure. Tell us how that turned out.
I was certainly the one taking the lead in the process, and I find that to be true in most people's families, that one person is very much drawn to this and, is very excited and enthusiastic and wants to get rid of more and more and more. And so I was going through the kitchen at one point, and I found these green football-shaped Jell-O molds in a drawer that I don't think we had ever used, and so I threw them out, of course, because why would I need Jell-O molds that we never use? And, about 2 or 3 weeks later, on my son's birthday, I was upstairs, and I hear my wife yelling for me down in the kitchen, and I get down there, and, of course, our son's birthday party was going to be sports themed, and so she had bought the Jell-O molds so that we could have football-shaped Jell-O for his birthday party. So I guess I learned my lesson a little bit about making sure I run things past my wife there, and I think the party turned out okay. We just had football field-shaped Jell-O rather than football-shaped Jell-O. So it worked out for me, but nonetheless, she was a little less than happy with me on that given day.
But when you're married and you are minimizing as a family, as a partnership here, you need to consult with each other is the moral of that story. Now, I'll just say this briefly so we'll have more time to talk, you and I, in our closing segment, but a great thing to do with kids is to set boundaries with them as you're encouraging them to minimize, for example, getting rid of toys. And one of the things you did with your daughter is you said you can keep as many toys as will fit in your closet. And then as far as her art projects, you can keep as many art projects as will fit under your bed. So that is great to give kids boundaries where they get to keep things, but only so many things, and so they get to pick what's important to them. I'm David Warren, talking with Joshua Becker about his new book entitled The More of Less, Finding the Life You Want Under Everything You Own. That's the subtitle, and the book is out on Waterbrook Press. Again, the name, The More of Less. Today's guest's name is Joshua Becker, and you can check out more on him on his website, becomingminimalist.com. I want to talk about that website when we come back, plus how we can join your minimalist community, Joshua. He and I will be back for the wrap-up after this. I'm David Warren, Program Director at Oasis Radio Network and one of the hosts of this podcast. All of our hosts enjoy hearing from you, our listening family, so drop us a note. Our email address is roadshow@oasisnetwork.org. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and you'll receive new episodes on your mobile devices. And now, back to the show. On today's Roadshow, we have been talking about finding the life we want under everything we own. That's the subtitle again of the book, The More of Less, by Joshua Becker, who joins us today by phone. And Joshua, I've had a really great time with you on the program, and I enjoyed reading the book and getting some great tips for my personal life. And I know you've really piqued the interest and creativity of our listeners today, and they will hopefully, as I will, join you on your minimalism journey. And you do have a community, so tell us about your community, because people are jumping on board left and right.
Yeah, we see 5,000 advertisements every single day that tell us to buy more, and I try to be one voice encouraging people to buy less. And so becomingminimalist.com was just started out for me as it was just a personal diary, just a personal journal of what we are getting and what we are keeping and the lessons that we were learning along the way. And over the years, more and more people began following our story and asking questions. And suddenly it turned into a conversation, not just about what I was doing, but how more people could embrace this, and it became a website that I wanted to use to encourage others, inspire others to live more by owning less. And it's taken off far beyond anything I ever would have dreamt or imagined. We have 1 million different readers every single month. We launched a magazine called Simplify earlier this summer. Obviously, the book, The More of Less, came out. Another book came earlier called Clutter Free with Kids. And we founded a nonprofit about 1.5 years ago called The Hope Effect, where we're changing orphan care around the world, which was a direct response to this idea of, if there's 1 million people that are coming to this website that don't want to buy things, what problem can we try to solve in the world if we were to try to focus some of those resources? So we're focusing on orphan care and doing some pretty fun work there. So it's been a pretty amazing ride.
Let's back the truck up just a bit here.
Sure.
The reason why you were able to start the Hope Effect, and tell us again what the Hope Effect does.
Sure. The short story is we're trying to change orphan care in developing nations where institutional-style orphanages, so kind of the ones most people picture, 4 walls, 30 or 40 kids, 4 or 5 caretakers, actually has some somewhat harmful effects on kids when they don't grow up in a family environment. And so our focus now is we're building a new style of orphanage, orphan care that has smaller homes, like a campus of 4 homes, and then each home has 2 parents and 6 to 8 orphans that live inside each of the homes. That way it mimics the family. It looks much more like a family, really God's intent for how children would grow up. So that's the work that we're doing there.
So because your family had decided to minimize, you had the time to do this great project called The Hope Effect. And by the way, you can get more information on today's guest's website, becomingminimalist.com. There's a link to it. But also because you had been frugal as a result of minimizing, when you got the advance for this new book we've been talking about, The More of Less, which is now available everywhere books are sold, you were able to give that advance towards this great project. So hats off from the Roadshow for that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's really quite amazing. I don't know how to say this. I mean, I was living this life before, so I'll say it as one who's made this mistake as much as anyone else. But it's really quite interesting how people want to be generous. I mean, I think 99.9% of people want to be generous. For some reason, we just can't seem to find the margin to be generous. Oh, I wish I could give. I wish I could support that. I just don't have the money to do it. Meanwhile, we're living in homes, bigger than at any point in human history. We have more things that, we have closets full of things we can't wear. We have garages that we can't park our cars in, and yet we're complaining that, we don't have enough money to support these things that we want to support. And in many ways, I think minimalism kind of causes us to see how much of our lives we have wasted, not just buying things, but taking care of all the things that we already do.
So in summary, the purpose of minimizing is to make room in our lives for what we really want to do in our lives and with our lives. Joshua, we've focused a lot on clutter and excess as we've been discussing how to minimize, but other areas which you cover in the book, which are very interesting, are minimizing your schedule, minimizing the time you do for body care, and even minimizing how many relationships you have in your life. Very interesting. In the book, The More of Less, by today's guest, Joshua Becker. So, how would you say your life differs from your life back in 2008 as we say goodbye?
Minimalism is very much about intentionality. It is about being intentional with the things that I own. And that intentionality in our possessions begins to spill over into so many other areas of our life, as you just mentioned. And so I would say my life differs today in that I am far more intentional in how I spend my time and my money and my energy, focusing more of those finite resources on the things that matter, and spending less of those resources on the things that don't.
Thank you, Joshua, for everything, for your time, for writing the book, for helping people around the world learn the joys of minimalism, making room in their lives to help others, have the time and the resources to help others. Thank you again for being with us on The Roadshow.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about it.
All right, tell us in just the minute we have left, what will people find when they go to becomingminimalist.com?
Sure. BecomingMinimalist.com is really the home space for everything that we do. They'll find helpful articles there on owning less. They'll find inspiration to keep along with the journey, and certainly can find other spaces where I am on social media and different projects I have going on, like the Hope Effect. But you can find it all there at the home base, BecomingMinimalist.com.
And again, the name of the new book, The More of Less, by Joshua Becker, available wherever books are sold, on Waterbrook Press, also online retailers. And as we conclude today's program, I want to leave you with a great quote from Joshua's book. He writes, "Every goodbye makes room for a new hello." For Joshua Becker, I'm David Warren, and it's been another great Roadshow. You've been listening to The Roadshow. If you'd like to write to us, here's our address. The Roadshow, P.O. Box 1924, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 74101. Our email address is roadshow@oasisnetwork.org. The views of today's guest aren't necessarily those of this station, but we do appreciate and thank our guest for spending this time with us. The Road Show, an Oasis Network presentation.